Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 18th of March 2025. We're going to start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them in the description to the video below. And we have some pretty high numbers in a few of these categories. 1,560 personnel lost is a high number. That's a real uptick from previous days that we have seen around 1,250, 1,200 thereabouts. There was one day over 1,300, but 1,560 is the highest we've seen for some time, so that's worthy of note. 8 tanks lost is a fairly decent number. It's a snip under the daily average, but it's still fairly significant. 20 troop carrying AFVs, likewise. 42 artillery systems, that's double the daily average, and that's a pretty good number. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. That is a very significant haul for the Ukrainians there. 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems, that's good stuff. Vehicles and fuel tanks, 107, typically fairly high, and 2 pieces of special equipment. So some fairly decent numbers there, particularly personnel and anti-aircraft warfare systems, artillery as well being consistently high. So we go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list. The first thing to note is there's a high number of personnel lost, 209. That's what he has tracked with all the socials. 209 Russians dying in those videos posted in this time frame, and we have really high losses on both sides. The combat assets are about the same, give or take. The Russians having more ATVs, and that's kind of what tips theirs over a marginal marginally more bits of kit lost for the Russians and the Ukrainians. It's going to be in the category of ATVs. We'll go to the Ukrainian losses first, as normal, and we'll have a look at and see if there's anything significant. First thing to note is fairly high damage, irretrievably lost against damaged, I guess there. Couple of boats thrown in, a few bits of artillery, including another damaged Bogdana. We have a destroyed M1 Abrams, that might well be up in the Kursk region. Quite a few, well, 5 tanks in all, 2 destroyed, 3 damaged. M1 Abrams is a significant one there. Infantry fighting vehicles, we have 7 of those. We have a captured Bradley, another one, that's going to hurt, and another destroyed Bradley, and the rest of them are BMPs, mainly destroyed, abandoned or captured. We have a single AFV. Then we've got half a dozen APCs, mainly, again, M113s. So losing a lot of M113s at the moment. A couple of VABs, a French-provided APC there. It's a wheeled APC. M113s are the old school tracked APCs. Then we have a lot of MRAPs. So maybe a dozen MRAPs, all but 2 destroyed or abandoned. These are all Western-provided ones or indigenously made. Kirpis featuring a lot. I've got the stats, I think, on the military aid for how many Kirpis the Turkish have provided for Ukraine, and it's really quite a lot. So that's why they are there. Of course, nothing compared to Humvees. I think they've had just a huge number of Humvees over the course of the war that have been provided, predominantly because the Americans have so many Humvees. I mean, just phenomenal. 230,000, is it? Something like that. So there's a big pool to dip into. But most of these MRAPs being destroyed or abandoned, and we're on to Humvees, and quite a few of them on the list, but most of those actually damaged. And then civilian vehicles, typically quite a lot of these, and most of those are destroyed. About probably 2/3 of them destroyed there. Okay, now we're going to go to the Russian losses. Just to say that a couple of Bradleys on the list and then 1 Abrams, that's going to hurt a little bit. Right, for the Russian losses, we start with another air defense system there, this time a Pantsir S1. We've seen quite a few of these recently. There's a montage with 4 of them taken out, and I presume this is from, well, it might well be from that montage. Interesting that beneath that you got a zoo park. I think I have that on video. No, here we go. Strike on a Russian counter-battery radar zoo park. So zoo parks are pretty expensive bits of kit. These are decent radars. HIMARS cluster munition took that out, so you can go and check that out in the description. All these videos are listed there. So that's a zoo park being destroyed. What do we have in artillery? Just 4 bits of artillery, nothing significant there. We've got 8 tanks, of which 4 of them are track guard and sheds. So, and 1 of them with mine rollers. That's exactly what I've been talking about recently. That's I said yesterday 1 out of 3. Okay, it was a smaller selection to smaller sample size to talk about, but today we've got a bigger sample size. 8 tanks and 50% are track guard and sheds. So when we have these high numbers of tanks, and I think 8 is comparatively high given the time of the war we're at, but even when we had sort of 19 yesterday or whatever, if we're thinking maybe a third to half of these tanks are being used as APCs, that tells you where the Russians are at, because I think it signifies that, yeah, and there are still a lot of infantry fighting vehicles and APCs being lost on this list today, but I think ideally they'd want even more of these AFVs to use, these armoured fighting vehicles, because I think they're using these tanks to get troops from A to B rather than as tanks to blow up other tanks or attack the enemy. So yeah, 50% track guard and sheds. That's the Mad Max style appendages to these tanks. Right, infantry fighting vehicles. We've probably got about 15 there. Quite a lot of BMP2s. We've got some BTRs thrown in, track guard and shed version as well. But yeah, almost all of those destroyed or abandoned, just 1 damage. So that's pretty significant losses for the Russians there. We have 3 out of 4 of the APCs destroyed, MTLBs and whatnot. We've got some infantry mobility vehicles, Tiger M's and Patriots, and then quite a few trucks here. That's a difference between this list and the Ukrainians. More trucks lost, Kamaz, Urals, and whatnot for the Russians there, and then a whole host of golf buggies and quads that the Russians have lost, mainly destroyed. And then civilian vehicles, again, 2/3 destroyed of these as well. Flatbed trucks, loafs, party loaf. Someone was asking me what a party loaf is. Let's go and find a picture. So here's the reference. I don't have a picture actually, but as someone asked Andrew Perpetua, what is a party loaf? He says it's a loaf with, so that's a Bukanka, the Scooby-Doo van. It's a loaf with the top and sides cut off. So you can throw a party in the back. So the top and the sides cut off. I guess it's just got the cab end. There are all sorts of different sort of loafs. You can see that Andrew documents. This one is the fanciest loaf. It has a hat and a veil with eyelash extensions. So there's a lot of loaf conversation going on in Andrew Perpetua's world. So there you go. A lot of kit taken out there, but fairly similar numbers for both sides. I guess the Russians losing a panzer and a zoo park though means that they have had a worse day of it, really, because those are 2 really high valued losses. Okay, talking about personnel, South Korea and Ukraine are apparently discussing the repatriation of North Korean prisoners of war. Seoul's Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yul told Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha that under South Korea's constitution, the captured soldiers are considered its citizens and can defect if they choose. Interesting. So that's happening. Right, a bit of a thread here from Andrew Perpetua talking about sort of losses of people here, but here really illustrating how heavy bombers, these heavy bomber drones, as he says, are no joke. This bomb killed everyone in the car, and there's an image there just to steal from a video. And look how much it missed by. Keep in mind these drones can carry like 8 of these bombs. Another car with 6 guys came to help the 3 who died, and 4 of them were killed too. This drone took out 2 larders and 7 Russians with 4 bombs. And he then sort of shows that. There's some images of that I can't really show. But yeah, that is the effectiveness of these Baba Yaga type bombs. Drones, and that's why the Russians complain about these so much, is that they can carry more munitions and they can do an awful lot of damage. That's 2 vehicles and 7 people completely taken out by that one drone. What else do we have? We've got some footage here of that zoo park getting taken out, which I've shown you. Then we have here destruction of Russian BM-21 Grad, as that's a multiple launch rocket system, Strela air defense system, and troops in the Zaporizhia direction. Why am I showing you this? I mean, that is fairly interesting in and of itself. You can go and watch it. It's a minute video there. But Zaporizhia appears to be somewhere that is heating up again. And as Andrew Perpetua says of his map change, only one major map change for the 17th, the Russians have expanded their control in Zaporizhia. They've entered Mali Shabaki and have presence in Stepova. It is currently unknown whether these footholds are maintained or transitory. They are. I was speaking to Zhenya yesterday. He gave me a phone call. He said basically they are trying to get across the Dnipro River. So that is something the Russians are doing, and they are attacking up into Zaporizhia. He was saying that there is going to be an agreement whereby the Russians and the Ukrainians, the Americans are going to force a freezing of the front line. And that front line will be frozen exactly where people are. It doesn't matter about oblast borders. So if the Russians don't have control of all of Luhansk, all of Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, then that's neither here nor there. It'll just get drawn where they are. And that will mean that the Russians are going to be trying to take as much territory as possible. It might also mean that the Ukrainians are going to be trying to take back as much territory as possible, which is why we've seen them pressuring in Kupiansk, in Toretsk, a little bit in Chasiv Yar, in Pokrovsk. They're trying to get that land back before there is this forced peace deal. So that is happening. Zaporizhia, that's important. Okay, we're going to go and talk a little bit about Kursk in this section. We're going to dip into not so much politics in this section, because I try not to do that generally in this video, but particularly in this first section. But actually something was said last night which directly makes claims about losses in Kursk. So we're just going to have a little talk about Kursk. Like a horror movie, Ukraine's troops in Kursk retreated. There's a BBC piece and report that talks of chilling testimonies from Ukrainian soldiers fighting in Kursk. Retreat under relentless Russian drone fire, blocking supply routes, which is something we have heard. Key roads were bombed, dozens of vehicles destroyed. 70,000 Russian troops were deployed in this area, including 12,000 North Koreans and kamikaze drones. So the Russians really, really, really wanted this area back. Ukraine inflicted 50,000 plus Russian casualties, but lost most of the gained territory. So some people saying this is still a massive success for the Ukrainians. The Russians lost phenomenal amounts of kit and people as a result of the Ukrainian incursion or invasion into Kursk. Right? Then they expended huge amounts of resources trying to get that land back, which they've succeeded in doing, but at a great cost. It depends what your metrics of success are. And as Puck Nelson was talking on Jonathan Fink's podcast the other day about how, it has been a success and they were never expecting to hold it this long. And although people talk about an exchange being a very valuable token for the Ukrainians to exchange, they might not have that token anymore. We'll come on to some news that actually the Ukrainians are attacking to Belgorod. That's the latest news we're hearing today. So they could be going for another exchange whereby they have some Russian territory of high value. But you can evaluate this in so many different ways. I think Kursk was definitely a success. It just ended very quickly with just a massive Russian attack and very good use of drones and a complete control of the supply routes. Was the operation a success? It forced Russia to redeploy troops, but at a heavy cost. Okay. Then we hear Oliver Carroll writing a piece in The Economist on the Kursk incursion or invasion. My piece on Kursk, the headline perhaps overdoes it. Often with writers, I've had this before when my headlines have been slightly changed and I'm like, I wouldn't put it like that, but nonetheless, eye-catching. So the headline reads, Ukraine's army escapes from Kursk by the skin of its teeth. So he said the headline perhaps overdoes it, but partial withdrawal was not a complete disaster. It was not the complete disaster painted by Russia or Trump, thanks to quick thinking by junior commanders. Quote, Trump appears to be getting his information from Russian Instagram reels, one says. We're going to come on to this because there's some absolutely wild claims. But Oliver Carroll then says it's clear things were already bad, with Russians pressuring logistics routes even before US intelligence cut off in early March. But some Ukrainian intelligence officers say they were blindsided by the Russian surge. Quote, the Americans are lying if they say we had everything we needed for defense. In other words, when you hear this idea that we only cut off offensive information and intelligence sharing, here you've got claims from Ukrainians in the Kursk region saying, no, we couldn't defend. It's probably because they thought Kursk as a whole was offensive, but we couldn't defend our positions in Kursk. We were blindsided. We didn't know what was going on because we had a sudden, and that's what I said. The coincidence, yes, you know, the writing could have been on the wall for Kursk, but it happened so quickly. I think there's a coincidence with regard to the American intelligence being switched off and then Kursk collapsing. And that is coming from the Ukrainians themselves. So, you know, there is that. Russia, Samuel Bendit, there's a piece in Forbes talking about new drone tactics sealed a Russian victory in Kursk. Russia's improved drone tactics aided in the advance against Ukrainian forces in Kursk, and that seems to be incontrovertible now. Andrew Perpetua is talking about the Rubicon group, who have very good, I think, drone capability and tactics, and we're using them really effective against the Ukrainians. Okay, so that was Kursk. Then we hear something last night about Kursk, which I wouldn't normally include here because it's like a politician saying something, but it is directly about saving troops in Kursk. And it's also wildly incorrect. It is, I don't know if you call it a lie or someone that thinks it's true and getting his intelligence from, I don't know, the worst sources on the internet. Quote, I saved the Ukrainian military in the Kursk region. I asked Putin not to take active actions against the encircled Ukrainian troops, and they were allowed to break out of the encirclement. What is going on here? This is really, really interesting. So I'm going to try and explain what I think's happening. Let's listen to his words himself.
Tomorrow I'm speaking with President Putin of Russia.
So he's speaking today. What you need to know is that Trump today is speaking to Putin, and they're going to come to some arrangement about partitioning up Ukrainian territory, arguably, working out who's going to get what, including nuclear power plants, and also Kursk, I think, is one of the concessions. So let's hear what he says.
To save some soldiers who are in deep trouble. They're captured. Essentially, they're surrounded by Russian soldiers. So I give you a lot of different things in one news conference, but it's a big deal. They're surrounded by Russian soldiers, and I believe if it wasn't for me, they wouldn't be here any longer. I was able to get them not to do anything at this moment, but it's a bad situation in Russia, and it's a bad situation in Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine is not good, but we're going to see if we can work a peace agreement, a ceasefire and peace, and I think we'll be able to do it. I'm speaking to President Putin tomorrow morning, yes.
So this is what he said last night, and essentially he said, I saved thousands of soldiers in Kursk, and I did that by making Putin let them go, right? Okay, so first of all, that's not true. That is simply not true. Ron Filipkowski from the Midas Touch Network saying, can legacy media please do effing stories on this ridiculous and obvious lie? I mean, what the F are you doing? So he repeats this blatant lie that the Ukrainian army was surrounded, but actually he's not just repeating a lie. What he's doing, and some analysts are saying this is an agreement between Trump and Putin about concessions. So, and this is defended by this weird video that came out the other day. And I reported on this. I didn't play it to you, but I showed you this video. I had it here, like now. A Russian fighter apparently participating in the battles near Sudzha, Kursk, in Russia's Kursk Oblast, disclosed that their command has inexplicably barred them from targeting Ukrainian forces, during their withdrawal. Right, this... At the time, this is weird. It's like, this isn't true. Like, what? So I kind of sort of ignored it. Now it makes sense. So this is a random bit of, this is, my opinion would be, this is a Russian plant, or like the Russian commanders have told him to do this and release this video and say, I don't know why I've been told not to shoot Ukrainians, but I've been told not to shoot Ukrainians. Then it comes out, then Trump says what he said last night, saying that he saved thousands of Ukrainians and he asked Russia not to kill them. Then you put it together with this. This is a concession. So people, but it's completely not a concession because it didn't happen. But what this is the only concession we have seen from Russia during the entire peace negotiations. Massively important, this. So then Trump can go into these arrangements with or go into the talk with Putin, come out with effectively no concessions from Putin. Putin gets his demands, and then Trump goes back to Ukraine with the maximalist demands of Russia. And then if they aren't adhered to, he has a go at Ukraine for not doing that. And then when Ukraine say to Trump, well, what have you done on behalf of us in getting concessions from Russia? He says, I saved you thousands of troops who were going to die surrounded in Kursk. To which other people then go, like people like you and I go, well, that didn't happen. But he claims it does, and that is his concession, and it's a non-concession. That's what's happened. It's honestly hugely important, and people are talking about this, that it's just it's part of this ploy, part of this almost, well, some people have been claiming that it's a formal agreement between him and Putin. Talking about Suja as well, there's a video here of Russians, big boxes of blue tape, Russians using blue tape disguising themselves as Ukrainian soldiers. And this is how stories about atrocities of the Ukrainian armed forces appear. So there's a lot, but the claims are that there's perfidy going on when they're dressing up essentially as Ukrainian soldiers committing kind of fake war crimes, and then using that as sort of leverage and as a PR win or whatever. We've seen a number of fake videos coming out. There was a whole line of Russian soldiers in red tape that was really fake the other day. I didn't even show it to you. These things come out really quite often. So just watch out for that. And if you see things being shared, just, be appropriately skeptical and show that skepticism to people that might be sharing false information. Now, the plot thickens. I told you when I got back from Ukraine at the end of January that I was given some information that the Ukrainians were going to attack somewhere. And I kind of held it back and I gave you some hints. But the idea for me was the Ukrainians were going to attack into Belgorod at some point as a kind of like another Kursk, but not attack into Kursk. Actually, get the Russians to concentrate all their forces over there and do something over here. And that could be happening now. It might not be, but it could be. AFU have launched an offensive into the Belgorod region, according to Russian mill bloggers. There is currently no official confirmation of this information from either side. It's just a lot of rumour and conjecture. But no report says Russian war bloggers claim that the Ukrainians have launched an offensive into Belgorod. They report attacks near the Russian villages of Prilicia, Grafivka, Demidivka, close to the Sumy region border. By nightfall, the AFU had moved equipment and personnel to the border, they complain. We've heard the rhetoric recently that the Russians are amassing to attack into Sumy. And this is what the Ukrainians did with Kursk, which is they amassed their defensive forces, saying that the Russians are going to attack, from Kursk into Sumy. And actually they use those defensive forces, or the idea of that happening, as a disguise for amassing the forces defensively, but actually they were for offensive reasons, and then they attacked into Kursk. That could have been what they've done again here in Belgorod, but it might not be. It might just be deep reconnaissance groups. It might, this might not be properly happening. No report says fighting reportedly taking place here, and he's mapped it. Ukrainian units consisting of infantry and supported by IMRs, armored vehicles and tanks are actively engaging in combat according to Russian channels. So, again, pinch of salt, etc. But this is what is being claimed. And then, we'll keep an eye on that today. there are negotiations going on. Trump is in Russia. I would imagine this is timed precisely because that's happening, or negotiations in general are happening. So as they lose Kursk and they lose that token, that exchange, valuable territory that they could exchange in Kursk, they could gain some in Belgorod just very quickly and be able to use that potentially to bargain. But again, that's thinking ahead to a situation that might not eventualize. Okay. It's also reported a military clinic yesterday caught fire in Vladikavkaz in Russia. I have no idea what's going on there, whether that's sabotage or a strike or whatever, but I'll just include that. We go on to distant strikes now. Not too much information coming out from last night. There were a lot of drones into Ukraine again, as per normal, 137 of them, 63 taken out by conventional means, 64 taken out by electronic warfare. That makes 127. Giving another 10 drones, which is something like, I don't know, somewhere between 7 and 9%, somewhere around there, I'm guessing, of drones getting through. This is happening routinely. 10 drones last night. Was it 12 drones the night before? That's a lot of drones getting through. There is a lot of damage being done to Ukraine every night at the moment because the Ukrainians are unable to get the interception rates that they were, say, a month ago. Something has changed. Either the Russian tactics, the Russian drone capabilities, the lack of Ukrainian air defense munitions. Something is happening whereby I think that there must be a change because there is a change in the data and something needs to explain that. Even though they're doing still a really good job compared to what they were doing earlier on in the war, where it was maybe 60, 70% of drones were taken out. Now we've been used to 95 to 100% of drones on many nights. And for that to drop down to sort of 90%, I think makes a really big difference. Now, one pretty, I would say horrific, that's the wrong word, because I don't know what has, been taken out by these strikes, and B, I think at the moment there are no casualties. The official line is there are no casualties, so at least there is that. But something significant has been hit in Dnipropetrovsk. Russian drones struck an infrastructure facility. They're causing a massive fire. No casualties reported so far, and that was again the case, I think, later. So what was described as a huge explosion and a fire after a drone strike in the city. Hell on earth in Dnipro, according to locals. The blast in Dnipro is believed to be in Obukivka, a satellite town just northwest of the city itself. No word on casualties or damage, but the urgency with which people are talking is not good, said Tim White. But this is some time ago. That's 12 hours ago now. So that was earlier last night. First glimpse of the scene from the massive blast in Dnipro. So there is some footage coming out of emergency workers there. Problem is getting info from Dnipro is that other drones were still flying around, and we will all know how much Russia loves to double tap. Another explosion has been reported just outside Cherkasy as well. What else do we have? Belgorod. No, I don't know that there is any other information from his thread. We're going to come on to that one. Okay, so we'll move on from there. No latest information. So Krasnodar, somewhere in Krasnodar was hit last night. As ever, there are, and Paul Sweeney sends me information quite often about firm status saying, look, there are strikes here and there, or there are fires here and there. So there's things that happen, like I keep saying, that go under the radar, so to speak, as far as social media is concerned. Now, Berdyansk was very colourful last night. Not quite sure what's gone on there. There could have been some significant strikes, although there are talks that it might well have been sort of wildfires. In fact, if we go back to Tim White, he said, I've seen a couple of accounts talk about possible strikes on occupied Berdyansk. There have not been any drone attacks as far as I can tell. Please remember there are a lot of natural wildfires breaking out at this time of year, and this is one of them, he says. I mean, that's an absolutely massive fire there, by the looks of it. It's certainly very, very colourful, almost beautiful, but yet not completely destructive and horrific. I don't, fires are, they're just awful, really. And that might have nothing to do with the war, or it might be a drone that's falling out of the sky in some heathland or whatever. What wild grass is taking to flame there. Moving on, Norwegian NASAMS anti-aircraft missile system, although it's a US-Norwegian co-production, delivered to Ukraine, demonstrated high efficiency. They've shot about 900 Russian air targets. I did mention this yesterday, by the way, with a success rate of 94%. So that's really good for them, and they are getting, in fact, they might even be making NASAMS missiles in Ukraine. That's, I think, the intention from, is it Kongsberg? That could be on the cards, but of course, with these things, they can take a lot of time to get up and running. What else? Spiegel reports that Ukrainians have found a way to jam Russia's guided glide bombs. This is something we have heard before. Jamming of their satellite guidance systems causes Russian glide bombs to miss their targets, requiring excessive munition usage. So in order to hit an individual target, they've got to use way more of them, and making them, making it much more expensive and logistically more challenging to hit particular targets. And the Ukrainians themselves are using bombs that are apparently doing a pretty good job. We've seen the usage of these, such as the other day at the Konka Bridge, or the bridge over the River Konka in the Dnipro River Delta area. We saw one of these French guided glide bombs, the Hammer AASM. These bombs, quote, these bombs prove to be the best, especially when destroying protected underground targets. They also prove to be the most resistant to electronic warfare. So this is call sign Phil, fired French-supplied AASM Hammer bombs. So good that the French are still providing them, and that they should be able to be dropped or fired from the Mirage 2000-5Fs, although I'm not 100% sure. I think they were adapting them. I thought they were going to come already adapted, but there was something to indicate that they were going to adapt them. Anyway, Zelensky has said today, I held a meeting at the military headquarters. Our drone has passed 3,000 kilometer test. So first point here is that they have drones that now can supposedly fly 3,000 kilometers, which means pretty much everywhere in Russia is going to be targetable. But also there was more talk yesterday about the long Neptune and that having an 1,000 kilometer range, because people were saying Moscow is now in range of Neptune missiles. And if that's the case, that is, I wouldn't use the term game changer, but if you can start hitting Moscow with missiles in the same way that Kiev can be hit with missiles, then actually that produces some interesting scenarios, put it that way. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. The Russian army is illegally sending soldiers infected with HIV and hepatitis to fight in the front line in Ukraine, where they are unable to get treatment or life-saving drugs. Men's relatives say they are slowly dying and putting other wounded men at risk. I'm not going to go through that whole thread there because it's a pretty long one, but you can get, just from that opening one, you can get the idea of what's going on. The Russians are almost certainly, because they are so desperate for troops, they are sending people who are woefully unfit for service into frontline fighting. Right. We also hear that the Russian energy giant Gazprom has suffered $13.1 billion in losses in 2024. Gazprom's financial troubles were compounded by falling share prices in its subsidiary Gazprom Neft and an increased income tax rate of 25%, which raised deferred tax liabilities. So they're in trouble. They've laid off a bunch of people as well recently. Arson attack. Now, this is huge. I did try and watch the news last night and I couldn't see anything about this on, say, the BBC News. This should be front page news, right? Arson attacks on shopping centres in Vilnius and Warsaw. So these are Lithuania and Poland, two European countries, two members of NATO. Arson attacks on shopping centres in Vilnius and Warsaw in May of last year were organised by Russian intelligence services, says Lithuania's prosecutor. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirms this by saying, "Dear allies, the investigation of the Lithuanian prosecutor's office has confirmed our suspicions that responsible for setting fires to shopping centres in Vilnius and Warsaw are the Russian secret services. Good to know before negotiations. Such is the nature of this state." To continue, the investigation revealed that the suspect who set fire to the IKEA store in Vilnius received a €10,000 and a used BMW for cooperation. So he got paid €10,000 and a second-hand Beamer. This is hybrid war, you want to call it? I call it war, right? This is a state actor behind destruction in both Poland and Lithuania. Now, with the Polish one, I told you that at the time. That was very much the prevailing theory. I didn't know much about Lithuania. I don't know if that one had passed me by or I've just forgotten. So much happens, right? This is huge. Like, the US should be taking this to Russia in the negotiations. Like what are you doing? That is war, right? It's really, really big, that. So what is the answer to that? Because if the answer is nothing, well, that's Russia for you. Such is the nature of this state, Donald Tusk. On the one hand, Donald Tusk is saying this has happened and it's the Russians, but on the other hand, he's saying such is the nature of this state. We'll take that to negotiations. Rather than like, hang on, that's war. Absolutely unacceptable that takes place. And there needs to be massive consequences to that. Possibly even military. Like, where all we do by underreacting to such activities is we end up condoning them. We end up giving Russia justification for doing it again. Absolutely unbelievable. And the Americans should be commenting on that. Those are NATO allies. You know, you could make an argument that requires a NATO reaction. That is NATO Article 5. You can make an argument for that. Kiev Independent says European nations urge UN action against Russian satellite sabotage. According to media, the disruptions have targeted Eutelsat and SES, Europe's main satellite providers, which support television, radio, and aviation navigation systems. Kiev Independent reporting on this. Again, warfare. You can call it hybrid warfare. I call it warfare. 8 European nations have filed a complaint with the UN over Russia's interference with European satellite communications, according to documents obtained by the Dutch current affairs television programme, NewsHour, I presume. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, Finland, France and the Netherlands signed a complaint urging Russia to stop its alleged sabotage. 17 other EU countries and the UK have expressed support for the initiative. The complaint was submitted to the International Telecommunications Union, the top global body overseeing satellite communications. The disruptions have targeted Eutelsat and SES, Europe's main satellite providers, which support, as mentioned, television, radio and aviation navigation systems. Last year, Eutelsat and SES traced the interference to Russian-controlled areas, specifically occupied Crimea and Kaliningrad. The most striking incident occurred when Russian war propaganda suddenly appeared on baby TV in the Netherlands and other European countries. Similar disruptions affected Ukrainian television channels. France and Sweden, where the satellite companies are based, have launched direct discussions with Russia at the UN in Geneva this week. However, previous attempts to engage Moscow in dialogue over the past year have largely failed. The interference poses serious risks beyond media disruption. Russia distorts navigation signals to confuse GPS-guided drones in Ukraine, but this also affects civilian aviation and maritime traffic, and we've seen that around the Baltics and going between Sweden and the Baltics, where planes have had to be diverted and whatnot. Since September 2023, more than 30,000 flights over the Baltic region have suffered interference, endangering safety and economic activity. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia warned in their complaint of the serious consequences these direct disruptions could have. Right, now we're going to talk about peace negotiations, because today is a very big day. I'll try and be quick. About 6 countries, including UK, France, Turkey, Canada and Australia, are discussing plans to send up to 30,000 troops to Ukraine. Other countries are ready to help with weapons and logistics. That's according to the Times. But I presume, well, I don't know. Is it only in the event of a ceasefire, or would it be to release troops to go to the front line? I presume it's going to be connected to a ceasefire. Now, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, on US-Russia relations, quotes, "We have 2 leaders of 2 great countries who are very good friends and very focused on how we can strengthen shared objectives and shared interests." So there we have the Director of National Intelligence, who yesterday retweeted something that someone who writes for the Russia Today organization, Ian Miles Chong, who's a despicable human, retweets him, slagging off American soft power. She's retweeting that as a person in charge of American soft power, arguably, or intelligence at the least. She's now talking about how Putin and Trump are really good friends and they're going to work at shared objectives and shared interests. Well, that's lovely. That's really nice. Thanks, Tulsi. It's really nice to see you supporting that love affair between the two men. Donald Trump says tomorrow morning, i.e. today, I will be speaking to President Putin concerning the war in Ukraine. Many elements of a final agreement have been agreed to, but much remains. Thousands of young soldiers and others are being killed. Each week brings 2,500 soldier deaths from both sides, and it must end now. I look very much forward to the call with Putin, President Putin. So there you go. That is going to be having a chat today. Now, the problem is people are worried about what that chat entails. New York Times have previewed the pump talks, Putin-Trump, and raises the spectre of Agent Orange. That's Tim White's name for Trump there, even giving the port of Odessa to Russia. This would cause public outrage in Ukraine, a deal Zelensky could not accept, and an excuse for traitor Trump to blame Ukraine and stop help. Talked about this previously, which is come to Ukraine with maximalist objectives. Ukraine says no, that's ridiculous, and then Trump says, what do you mean? No, right, we're going to punish you. Even though Russia have already said no, and a week ago, and there's been nothing, not a single, we don't hear a jot or tittle out of the US regarding Russia's refusal to do a ceasefire. It's playing out exactly as I predicted. The talks between Putin and Trump in Washington will take place today, 1 o'clock UK time. Peskov confirmed the timing, saying 2 hours have been set aside in the diary. Now, there is talk. Semaphore are reporting that Trump is weighing recognising Crimea as Russian territory in a bid to end the war. This will be a non-starter. I spoke to Zhenya last night, as I said, and he is like, that won't be agreed to the Ukrainian people. That's a red line. If it's true, the US is considering, this is Eric Cross saying this, is considering recognising some or all of Russia's land grabs achieved through force and aggression. It would mark a fundamental shift in US foreign policy of over 93 years. It signals the end of international legal order and states sovereignty as we know it. In response to Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and the creation of the puppet state of Manchukuo, a US Secretary of State, Henry Stimson, issued a formal non-negotiation policy in January 1932. What became to be known as the Stimson Doctrine stated that the US would not recognise territorial changes resulting from aggression or violations of international agreements. This policy was applied to Japan's conquests in China and later extended to Nazi Germany's annexations. The policy of not recognising territorial gains made by force was formally articulated in the Summer-Welles Declaration of July 23rd, 1940, when the United States refused to recognise the Soviet annexation of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. The principle became a cornerstone of US Cold War policy, leading to decades-long non-recognition of Soviet territorial expansions. The prohibition use of force for territorial gains is a main idea of the UN's Charter Article 2, brackets 4. This is a cornerstone of modern state sovereignty. US based its action in the First Gulf War on this principle. President George H.W. Bush issued a non-recognition statement on August 5th, 1990. Quote, a puppet regime imposed from the outside will not be tolerated. We do not recognise this annexation, nor will we ever recognise it. Finally, in July 2018, the previous Trump administration issued the Crimea Declaration that states, quote, as we did in the Welles Declaration in 1940, the United States reaffirms as policy its refusal to recognise the Kremlin's claims of sovereignty over territory seized by force in contravention of international law. In concert with allies, partners and the international community, the United States rejects Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea and pledges to maintain this policy until Ukraine's territorial integrity is restored. So if it does go against it, if Trump does go against that, he's going against his own declaration. Right now, this text seems to have been removed from the US Kiev Embassy's website. And there you go. If we are truly witnessing the reversal of the Simpson Doctrine and the dismantling of the UN Charter, then as of tomorrow, we'll be living in a profoundly different world. That will then give the US, I guess, permission to take Canada, Panama, Greenland. US becomes no better than Russia. And there you go. It's happening right in front of our eyes. Now, Ukraine's territorial integrity is not up for negotiation, says MP Venislavsky. When we currently lack the military capability to liberate all occupied territories, they will remain temporarily occupied until we reclaim them, either militarily or diplomatically. Concessions are not an option. So Ukraine will not agree to this, but that then becomes an opportunity for the US and Russia to hit them with a stick. Absolutely shocking. And then we hear this. I mean, this woman is despicable, the White House press secretary. But this is bad.
President referenced power plants with a conversation with Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. What is he referring to with power plants? What is that?
There's a power plant that is on the border of Russia and Ukraine.
No, it's not. That's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and it's not on the fricking border. It's nowhere near the border. It's near the front line where Russia have invaded and are currently occupying. But it's not the border of Russia and Ukraine, you absolute douchebag. That is not acceptable to be the rhetoric of the United States White House. They have changed sides. Christopher Miller from the Financial Times says there is not a nuclear power plant on the border of Russia and Ukraine, as Lever incorrectly stated in a presser. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is well inside Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, but in Russian-occupied territory. Moscow has held it and its workers hostage for 3 years, threatening a nuclear incident by sabotaging it. And yet that appears to fit in line exactly with what the American approach might well be, which is to recognize some of the occupied territories as actually Russian and then just casually call the occupied territories the Russian border. It's an absolute shocker.
We had to get Ukraine to do the right thing. It was not an easy situation. You got to see a little glimpse at the Oval Office. But I think they're doing the right thing right now, and we're trying to get a peace agreement done. We want to get a ceasefire and then a peace agreement.
So people are really picking up on this, and rightly so. Trump confirmed that his argument with Zelensky in the Oval Office during the Ukrainian president's visit to the United States was not accidental, but a planned, quote, part of a strategy to pressure Ukraine. He also stated the US decision to stop supplying weapons in Ukraine had no consequences for the Ukrainian army.
Was now all but pulled out of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you think there was any effects of the fall on aid and intel to Ukraine that may have contributed to this loss of?
No, not at all. No, not really the opposite. I think it was appreciated, and we have to understand, and you have to understand that if I see somebody doing something bad, that's going to cause a lot of death. The only reason I'm involved, and this is Russia and Ukraine, but a lot of people, it's humanity. I'm involved for humanity. A lot of people are being killed over.
You're not, because you stopped weapons and intelligence that led to people dying. So if you really cared about humanity, you would care that Russia is absolutely hammering Ukraine every single night with bombs and missiles and drones. But no, you just want a quick peace deal so you can do some economic handshaking with Russia. We had to get Ukraine to do the right thing. It wasn't an easy situation. You saw a little scene in the Oval Office. But I think Ukraine is doing the right thing now, and we're trying to get a peace agreement, get a ceasefire, and then a peace agreement. So Shashant Joshi, last 24 hours, I think. Director of National Intelligence says Trump and Putin are very good friends and very focused on how we can strengthen shared objectives. Trump openly talks about dividing up assets, i.e. Ukraine, and we talked about that yesterday. That was a quote from yesterday. They want to effectively dividing up assets, certain assets. Literally carving up Ukraine between the Russians and, I guess, the rest of the Ukrainian sovereign nation. Trump considering, and the US, because they're going to get some of their minerals, right? So it's just these two great nations. So Trump would see it carving up Ukraine. And then Trump considering recognizing Crimea as part of Russia. There you go. That's what's going on. Anyway, that's enough from me. We'll be following it today in terms of the peace negotiations, or at least a telephone call between Trump and Putin. I do have a live today at 2 o'clock. In fact, I should be having a live today with a Canadian military trainer. Then I've got a live tomorrow with Malcolm Nance. And then a live on Friday, again, all at the same time, with Marika Mariashvili. I think that's her name, from Georgia. And we're going to be talking about Georgia. So look out for 3 lives in a row. Busy week. Take care. Speak soon.